He who learns to set boundaries discovers that respect is not born from the desire to be loved, but from the courage to refuse to be made smaller. Disrespect never announces itself. It doesn't explode like thunder or shatter the silence like a gunshot. It whispers. It reveals itself in a barely perceptible detail, a smile that lasts a second too long, an ironic tone of voice, a joke disguised as friendship, a seemingly harmless interruption. That's how it begins. Hardly anyone notices. Most people laugh along, pretend they don't care, let it go. And in that very moment, in that moment of weakness disguised as tolerance, defeat is already sealed. Because disrespect isn't just an inappropriate word, not just a bad joke. Disrespect is a test, a calculated provocation to measure how far you'll allow it. And every time you ignore it, every time you laugh, every time you try to convince yourself that it's not worth making such a fuss, you've passed the test. The answer is clear. I offer no resistance. I am not a threat. I am not someone who needs respect. Machiavelli knew this like few others. He lived in a time when showing weakness was not only embarrassing, but deadly. In a world where betrayal, manipulation, and the elimination of rivals were part of survival, there was no room for naivety. He understood a brutal truth that the weak still refuse to accept today. Respect is not earned as a reward for merit. Respect is imposed like a law. It is written in flames and repeated over and over again until it becomes unquestionable. That is why some are ignored, belittled, and ridiculed their entire lives, while others, even silently and without raising their voices, are treated with reverence. The difference is not one of goodness, talent, or kindness. The difference lies in how each person reacts to disrespect. Stop for a moment and think about how many times you've gone to bed at night, closed your eyes, and suddenly a scene pops up in your mind in which someone mistreated you. That offhand remark, that public joke, that mocking tone. You remember it. Feel the anger rising within you. Imagine 1,000 different reactions, biting sentences you could have said, looks you could have given. But you didn't. Not at all. You remained silent, maybe even smiled, maybe said something to break the tension. And now, alone, you relive that scene over and over again, as if it were a wound that never heals. That is the effect of unspoken disrespect. It doesn't go away. It stays. It builds. It shapes the way you see yourself. And why does this happen? Because every act of disrespect isn't just about the other person. It's about you. If someone hits you and you do nothing, that message doesn't just stay in the aggressor's mind. It's also imprinted on you. It's as if you're telling yourself, I don't deserve to be defended. I'm not worth it. That's the poison that slowly destroys. With every cowardly silence, with every concession, you not only lose ground in the eyes of others, but also internal territory. And that territory, once conquered, is rarely recaptured without a fight. That's why it's often the kindest, most generous, and most helpful people who suffer the most from emotional and social abuse. Because they believe that good will be repaid with good, that patience will one day be recognized, that kindness in itself earns respect. But that's not how the world works. The world doesn't reward cowardly silence. The world rewards attitude. And if you don't take yours, others will. The void you leave by not asserting yourself will be filled by someone who doesn't hesitate to assert themselves. You may be wondering, wouldn't it be overreacting to every detail? Wouldn't it be paranoid to see disrespect in every little gesture? That's the trap. Intelligent disrespect never comes as a blow, demanding an immediate response. It seeps in like diluted poison. First a little joke, then a condescending tone. Later, an ostracism here, an interruption there. Viewed in isolation, these actions seem silly, but together they form a pattern, and that pattern is deadly. The aggressor is testing, watching, and measuring your reaction. Every time you laugh, every time you don't defend yourself, every time you dodge, they learn they can move forward. Until the day you look around and realize you've become everyone's emotional punching bag. Good people who believe in the power of kindness become the receptacle for others' frustrations. Colleagues interrupt them without hesitation. Friends make jokes at their expense. Family members dismiss opinions. Partners ignore boundaries. And when the anger finally explodes, when your weary heart rebels, the reaction seems disproportionate. You yell, argue, lose control, and ironically, Others still use this against you. See how you're overreacting. See how out of control you are. The cycle is complete. You're trained to be ignored when you remain silent and judged when you speak. Machiavelli was under no illusions about this. He knew that human relationships are governed by constant, invisible, incessant power struggles. He knew that every encounter between two people is a silent negotiation of status, that every word, every gesture, every silence defines a hierarchy. Most people live as if they were playing checkers. They react to what appears before them, move predictably, and believe that it is enough to survive the next move. In contrast, few play chess. They view each move as part of a larger pattern, calculate future consequences, and take positions. That is why some garner respect seemingly effortlessly, while others beg for it and never receive it. But here's a question many avoid. Is the problem with others or with yourself? Because if disrespect were only the product of bad, unfair, and cruel people, it would be the exception. The uncomfortable truth is that disrespect is repeated towards the same people precisely because they have trained the world to treat them that way. A predator doesn't attack everyone. It observes, selects, analyzes who doesn't respond, who doesn't bite, who walks away instead of fighting. Disrespect works the same way. It senses weakness, and the most common weakness is excessive kindness, the false nobility that mistakes tolerance for cowardice. How often have you heard phrases like, "Be the strongest, let it go," or "There's no point in arguing," or even, "Ignore it. Silence is consent." Culture as a whole seems to teach that maturity means swallowing bitter pills, that strength means not reacting, that nobility means accepting humiliation with a smile. But that's not how human psychology works. When you let disrespect go, others don't think, "What a sophisticated person." They think, "What an easy target." It's painful to admit, but disrespect doesn't go away if you don't address it. It grows. And worse, it corrodes not only your outward image, but also your inner self. You begin to believe you don't deserve better treatment. You become accustomed to mediocrity in relationships. You accept less than your worth, and by accepting that, you reinforce the cycle. With every concession, your dignity diminishes a little more, until you even begin to doubt whether there's anything left to defend. That's why the first part of this journey is so crucial. Understanding that disrespect is never innocent. It's always a test. It's always a strategic move, even if it seems spontaneous. It always involves the question, will you allow it? And every time the answer is yes, every time you pretend not to notice, every time you convince yourself you're being adult by ignoring it, the other person learns the lesson. You're someone they can use. Now ask yourself with brutal honesty, how many times in your life have you made it clear that you're willing to be used? How many times has your passivity caused others to go a little further, laugh a little louder, ignore your opinion, and mock your boundaries? How many times, believing you were avoiding conflict, have you actually sealed your own doom? Disrespect is like a snake, gliding silently through a dark room. As long as you don't turn on the light, as long as you don't move, it will approach. Slowly at first, almost invisibly, then, ever more boldly, closer, until, before you know it, it has wrapped itself around your legs, closing in on your space and suffocating you. That is the nature of disrespect. It never stops on its own. It never limits itself. It never disappears on its own. It must be stopped. It must be confronted. It must be squashed before it grows so large that it swallows everything. And here's the truth the weak can't bear. Silence at the wrong time is not maturity. It's complicity. Laughing at jokes directed at yourself is not sportsmanship. It's acquiescence. Letting something slide just this once is not understanding. It's self-abandonment. Every time you allow something, you teach. Every time you ignore, you train. Every time you remain silent, you surrender. This is the stark reality. This is how you explain a whole life spent in the shadow of disrespect. Ruined careers, shattered relationships, shattered self-esteem. And all because, right at the beginning, at the first whisper, the first crooked smile, the first interruption, the person decided not to respond. They decided it wasn't worth it. They decided silence was noble. And without realizing it, they signed an invisible contract. You can treat me however you want. I won't respond. But if you've made it this far, it's because you're tired of this contract. Because you feel the burden of sleepless nights spent silently reliving humiliation over and over again. Because you know something has to change, and change requires a shock. It requires the realization that disrespect isn't an accident, but a strategy, that every ironic smile is an attack, that every mocking tone is a test, that every cowardly silence is a sign of submission. And the question that remains, the question that echoes like a relentless hammer blow in the back of your mind, is, how long will you put up with it? How long will you laugh along so as not to appear weak? How long will you pretend you don't care while burning inside? How long will you allow others to write your story while you watch in silence? Because the game of respect has already begun. It began the first time someone mocked you and you smiled. It began with the first contemptuous look you seemingly didn't notice. It began the first time you chose the wrong silence. And this game knows only two roles, the respected one and the used one. The question is simple, brutal, inescapable. Which role will you continue to play? Have you ever noticed how some stories begin with such small details that hardly anyone notices them, but end like an earthquake? This hidden power play happens daily, in the most ordinary places. In the conference room, at the dinner table, in a messaging group, in the coffee kitchen, in the mall parking lot, at the gym, in the hallway at home on a Sunday afternoon. The disrespect that began as whispers in part 1 now takes the form of a board game. The pieces move slowly, but they don't stop. You walk into a meeting and notice that your usual seat has been taken by someone who arrived later. Nothing bad, you think, except that the same person no longer looks at you when you speak, and the manager, distracted, coordinates the agenda with everyone except you. A friendly colleague offers to take the minutes and asks for just a brief summary of your proposal, as if your idea needs to pass through her sieve to exist. On the way back, 2 muffled chuckles behind you. When you turn around, they both stop and ask if everything is okay. Yes, it is, you reply, and continue. That afternoon in the kitchen, the comment slips out. So-and-so's plan is so daring. The tone isn't complimentary. And you suddenly feel too big for the reserved space, but too small to be taken seriously by others. This isn't an accident. It's a test. It's a board game. A similar story happens when you're planning a dinner with friends you've known for years. Everyone in the group says they'll be there, but the day before, 2 people say they can't make it. A third says they're in a hurry, but sends a 2-minute audio message praising your efforts. You say it's fine and insist on keeping the appointment. On the day itself, one of them shows up 40 minutes late and comes in loudly, apologizing, hugging everyone, and telling a joke about the last time you made the wrong entry to a bar. You laugh, and someone adds, "But we love you, okay?" You smile. The meal is delicious, the conversation flows, but the table has already become a stage. When the bill arrives, the same person who was late forgot their wallet, another has no credit on Pix, and the third asks if you can fix the problem, and then they'll pay you. You, to avoid any embarrassment, pay. 2 days later, no one brings up the topic. Nothing for a week. When you finally ask them, they react with slight surprise. Wow, that's right. I completely forgot how crazy I am. It's not just their bad memory, it's the hierarchy. Through their reaction, this group discovered who bears the invisible costs. Not with food, but with energy, dignity, and position. The same game plays out over small decisions at home. A relative criticizes your career in front of everyone. Just an honest opinion, he says. Someone else interrupts with a joke to lighten the mood, but the joke is also on you. You swallow hard and change the subject because it's not worth arguing about. That evening, as you go to bed, the scene comes back to you like an early morning beacon. You know why it hurts? Because everyone saw it, and watching without reacting is a record. The social brain is a meticulous archivist. It organizes the facts, categorizes who commands and who obeys, who remains silent and who imposes, who apologizes and who gets it. This file silently dictates how you'll be treated next time. At work, the chessboard becomes even clearer. Pay attention to the choreography of who interrupts and who is interrupted. Who emails their boss a copy when they could resolve the issue with you? Who makes suggestions to rewrite your work without acknowledging the originator? Who calls you a genius in public but privately misplaces your priorities? Excessive praise is often a cover for professional degradation. It's like this. They put you on a pedestal with words and pull the rug out from under you with actions. You don't fall because you were pushed. You fall because the rug was gradually pulled out, like someone quietly pulling away a rug. Machiavelli would consider this the essence of politics. Nothing needs to be said, It is enough to establish the habit. Whoever dictates the habit dictates the hierarchy. This reveals the game's deep logic. Every gesture has its price and its benefit, but hardly anyone calculates it. You pick up the phone in the middle of the night to help a colleague in crisis and earn eternal gratitude. But the next day, the message, "You're great," doesn't translate into defense when someone attacks your idea. You remain silent, not out of obvious ingratitude, but because the cost of defending yourself outweighs the benefit of neutrality. In their minds, the calculation is involuntary. If I defend him, I become a target. If I remain silent, I keep my place. And so neutrality becomes complicity with the aggressor, not out of malice, but out of convenience. In power games, convenience is a force of attraction. It drags everything down except those who learn to counteract it. You might think these dynamics exist only in toxic companies or broken families. Don't be fooled. They're present in your condo when the building manager ignores your complaint until your powerful neighbor repeats the same demand. They're present at the gym when the trainer makes eye contact with everyone except you, and, at the end of the group workout, tells the group, "Good job," and you, "Thank you." They're present at the doctor's office when your pain is dismissed as anxiety before being examined. They're present in line at the movie theater when someone pretends not to see you and jumps in front of you with a "it's going fast." Small imbalances that add up to a lopsided landscape. And when the landscape is lopsided, every step you take feels like a stumble until you start walking, apologizing for your existence. But if all of this is so insidious, how do you recognize the first step? Start by noticing where speech and gestures diverge. The colleague says, "Your presentation was great," but looks at his watch while speaking. The friend says, "I'm sorry about yesterday," but uses a tone that minimizes the impact. The relative repeats, "I speak out of love," but chooses public moments for private lessons. Body language is the true subtitle of what is being said. If the subtitles contradict the tone, trust the subtitles. The social brain is still tribal. It evaluates posture, rhythm, intonation, space. Who takes the center without being asked, who lightly touches your shoulder while speaking, who sits a little higher, who scatters objects all over the table, who determines who speaks first. These are territorial markers, not on a symbolic level, but on a concrete level. The blackboard is physical before it is psychological. There are also unexpected twists, and this is where you begin to see how the game changes when you change. Imagine that at your next meeting, instead of looking for the empty seat, you sit early in the middle of the table, slowly open your notebook, straighten up, and don't touch your phone. If you are interrupted, you stop mid-sentence and stare at the interrupter without anger, without smiling, without hurrying. The silence that follows is not empty, but pressure. 3 seconds feel long. 4 feels like an eternity. The person hands you back the sentence. "Excuse me, you may continue." The group registers it. It's not about winning an argument. It's about rewriting a habit. The first twist is always silent. Once made, it changes the gravity of the room. The following week, the same person thinks twice before interrupting you. Not because they agree with you, but because they understand the cost has changed. Another turning point occurs when you decide not to erase other people's worries. The friend who forgot their wallet 3 times in a row calls and asks for help. You answer, listen for 30 seconds and say, "I can't make it today." They insist. You calmly repeat, "Not today." The old justification reflex kicks in. You almost want to explain why you can't, but you hold back. After the phone call, feelings of guilt creep in. Time for the internal counterattack. I could have helped. It wouldn't have cost anything. It costs. It costs the pattern. If you give in now, you'll undo the turnaround. At the next meeting, when the bill arrives, you won't get your wallet before everyone else. You wait. Does no one move? Neither do you. The silence is oppressive. Someone breaks it. Should we split it? The pattern falters. Maybe he's trying to joke. Look, he was serious, huh? You don't react. The laughter dies down without finding any fuel. Don't make yourself a clown of your own discomfort. This will stabilize the board on your side. Some stories seem insignificant, but they are the most revealing. A woman who always took her son to school and was ignored by other mothers because she came and went too quickly, decided to arrive 5 minutes early and stand still, without touching her phone, just watching the entrance. The first week, nothing happened. The second, a mother approached her and started a conversation. In the third, greeting upon arrival became the norm. What changed? Presence. Where there had previously been defensive haste, there was offensive calm. Within 2 weeks, an invitation for coffee came from someone who previously couldn't see her. The board responded to the new piece, not because she was cooler, but because she became clearer. Clarity is power. Invisibility is defeat. In the digital world, the game is even more subtle. A work group creates messages over the weekend. You, who always respond promptly, realize that your speed has become an expectation, and this expectation a demand. So you decide to respond on Monday at 9 a.m. Nobody dies. No building burns down. On Tuesday, you realize that your availability isn't unlimited. On Friday at 11 p.m., the boss sends something with the word urgent. You read it, take a deep breath, and ask the next morning, do you need it today or by Wednesday evening? The mere act of asking confirms that you aren't reacting reflexively. Those who don't react reflexively are uncontrollable by those who use urgency as a tool. Asking the right questions changes the game, not to confront, but to calibrate. Calibration is the art of making the costs of abuse higher than the benefits. And what happens when disrespect disguises itself as charm? There are people who have mastered social seduction perfectly. First they praise, then they isolate. You are invited to an interview to promote you. You are told about a great vision, a bright future, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. At the end comes the demand. For this, you will have to give a little more of yourself. That means staying twice as many hours, taking on 3 times as much responsibility, and serving 3 people you don't respect. You accept because the future is tempting. 2 weeks later, the future becomes a vague promise. For 3 months, there is silence. The board was set up so that you could play for free. The trick is both simple and difficult. Make agreements dependent on concrete milestones. I'll take over X when Y is signed. I'll deliver A after B is defined. Those who manipulate promises hate clarity. Those who play fair don't fear clarity. If the answer is vague, you know you've already received the information you need. The proposal wasn't a promotion, it was a ripoff. Consider, too, the environments in which you ask permission to exist. At the doctor's, you say, "It's silly, but," before describing the pain. At the bank counter, you begin your sentence with, "Sorry to bother you." At the store, you ask to take a quick look, as if touching an object were a crime. These words aren't polite. They signal to the board that you're a lightweight, easily pushed piece. Swap "sorry" for "good morning." Swap "it's silly" for "you need to look." Swap "will it work" for "when will it be ready." It's not arrogance, it's position. Position changes the course of interactions like a detour changes the course of a river. The same request from a different position has a different outcome. The social world responds to density. You become dense when you stop trying to fit in and start occupying something. At home, in intimacy, the game seems cruel if you decide to change it. Your partner, who has grown accustomed to your boundless understanding, feels like an attack when you say a clear no. It isn't. It's a limitation. They say you're different. You're not yourself anymore. And they're right. You're the version you should have been when it all began. This upsets those who organize themselves around you to gain privileges. Tests will come. Calculated silence, the withdrawal of affection, the passive-aggressive comment, the comparison to the past. You used to be so patient. Respond with facts. Now I have a schedule. Now I have priorities. Now I don't accept jokes about me. If there's an attempt to ridicule, don't defend yourself. Don't explain, don't back down. Cut the conversation off. The board of intimacy is corrected by repetition. Once is not enough. 10 times seems excessive. The 11th time, the game changes hands. There's still one mysterious element you must accept. Strategic unpredictability. People who abuse you rely on your predictability. They know you'll laugh, explain, pay, give in, and respond. If one day you don't laugh, explain, pay, give in, or respond, the other person's brain doesn't find that cute. It perceives it as dangerous. Not dangerous in the physical sense, but politically. You're losing track of your behavior. Without that track, there's no shortcut to using you. Here lies a twist that few have the courage to embrace, making friends with the discomfort of others. Those who can't stand to see others uncomfortable will always be hostage to those who use their own discomfort as a weapon. Sometime this afternoon, you're standing in a long line. Someone comes from the side, smiling and carrying a bag, and tries to push in, muttering, "Just a quick question." You look him in the eye and say, "The line starts at the back." He insists, trying to antagonize the audience with an "oh man, how rude." You repeat. The line starts at the back. You don't explain. You're not giving a civics lecture. You're not seeking allies. You're not showing anger. You're simply holding the line like someone holding a door. Those behind you are watching you. Two disapproving glances appear. One stays by your side. The other says nothing. It doesn't matter. What matters is that for the first time in a long time, you haven't given in. It seems like a small thing, but it's reprogramming your system. You're increasing your tolerance for friction. When you increase your tolerance for friction, you no longer pay an emotional toll at every opportunity. Sometimes life throws us an episode so perfect it seems scripted. An employee whose idea was always tweaked by a colleague decided to send a short email to the team at the end of a meeting. Here's the proposal as we presented it today. Main points: 1, 2, 3. I'm happy to help. The colleague replied, I've tweaked a few points to make it clearer. Instead of the usual thank you, she responded with 3 lines. Points 1 and 3 reflect the original proposal. Point 2 changes the scope and requires management approval. In the meantime, we'll keep the original proposal. It wasn't an attack. It was an attitude. Behind the scenes, the colleague complained to the manager about difficulty working together. The manager called them both in. She brought the list of previous emails in which the colleague had unilaterally changed the scope. She didn't raise her voice, she showed it. The result wasn't a trophy, but something more valuable. From then on, every change went through her. Her name emerged from the shadows. The social archive was rewritten. There are also quiet turns of phrase that no one applauds, but which move mountains inside. The father, who grew up apologizing for everything, decides not to repeat the drama of submission with his son. In the park, someone pushes the boy in line for the slide. Instead of telling his son, it's okay, he approaches the other father and says calmly, your son moved up, mine waited. Let's organize this. The other father shrugs. He repeats, let's organize this. The tone doesn't change. The other father, embarrassed, calls his son back. The boy on the slide learns 3 things at once: that there are rules in the world, that his father knows how to defend him without shouting, and that proper silence comes after the order, not before. The father learns that peacefulness is not the same as passivity. They walk home in silence, both a little louder. And if all else fails, if despite your poise, your silence, and your consistency, a lousy environment prevails that rewards those who tread lightly, the answer is sometimes the decision you've been avoiding out of fear. Leave. Change teams, companies, cities, districts, not to escape, but for strategic reasons. Boards aren't eternal, they're decisions. Stay where there are rules, and leave where there's deception. Leaving isn't losing. Losing is staying where your presence is used to maintain the deception. By leaving, you deprive those who relied on your silence of social capital. The cost of exploiting you becomes infinite from one moment to the next, and you arrive at the new table different because you've learned to map the terrain, register signs, intervene early, speak less, and carry more weight. You may be asking yourself, what about justice? What about right and wrong? Why do I have to play? Because the game exists whether you like it or not. The question is not whether you play, but whether you play consciously. Naive moralism is the currency of those who accumulate elegant defeats. Ethics and strategy are not enemies. Ethics without strategy becomes an empty sermon that no one respects. Strategy without ethics becomes a tyranny that eventually collapses. The sure way Machiavelli would teach if he were writing for today's world is to balance character and calculation, to keep the kernel firm and make the form fit the game plan. This way you can be good without being foolish, steadfast without being cruel, clear without being arrogant. This is not easy, it is necessary. If you want to start a practical test tomorrow, do 3 things. First, pay attention to the first step in every interaction. Who speaks first? Who sets the agenda? Who asks the leading question? If it's not you, don't jump in with an answer. Hesitate for a moment and correct the point with a question of your own. Second, replace long explanations with position papers. I won't do that. We can discuss, but no attacks. We'll agree via email. Third, end toxic interactions summarily. I'll stop here. We'll continue later. Not now. You don't have to win arguments. You have to stop funding them with your energy. Every time you save energy, you accumulate capital for the next step. When you adopt these micro turns, the world reacts. Some move away. Those who liked you, who paid the bill and apologized for breathing. Others come closer. Those who always respected you but stayed away because they saw you surrounded by noise. The quality of people changes depending on the quality of your boundaries. It's like adjusting the focus of a lens. The background blurs, the essentials emerge. Your conversations become shorter, your decisions clearer, your intentions more honest. And when someone tries to drag you back into the old script, you recognize the trap by the trail of words they've always used with you. Just this once. You're so understanding. Don't do this to me. You've changed. Yes, you have. Those who don't change remain decorations in other people's games. Ultimately, the secret game of power isn't a manual for world domination. It's a guide to avoiding being dominated by it. You learn to recognize the test where you once saw a joke, to read the subtitles where you once heard a speech, to put the rug back together when someone pulls the rug out from under you. Not out of paranoia, but out of clarity. Not to humiliate someone, but to avoid accepting the humiliated role. Because respect isn't a trophy you receive for kindness. Respect is a field you surround with poise, silence, constancy, and consistency. And once surrounded, you know how to behave. If you don't know, you retreat. If you persevere, you learn. You may be wondering how you can endure all this without becoming cold and bitter. The answer lies in the source from which you draw your validation. Those who need constant recognition become puppets of all applause. Those who find validation in their own consistency can endure boos without batting an eyelid. Consistency is not stubbornness, but the alignment of values and actions. You know your alignment when you do what is necessary, even when no one is looking, when you say no, even when you are afraid of losing something, when you maintain the silence that requires courage. Respect begins where fear of displeasure ends, and then comes the moment when the board changes color. You enter a room and no longer have to think about how to position yourself. You are already positioned. The conversation begins, and you don't rush to fill it. You measure, weigh, decide what is worth talking about. The lame joke appears and fizzles out into the air without you laughing. The insulting plea comes and dissolves into your curt reply. You realize that for the first time you are not trying to survive the meeting, the dinner, the group. You are shaping the contours of the space you occupy. It's not about being the strongest. It's about not being the most available. It's not about beating others. It's about overcoming patterns that have beaten you. And if the scenario seems too favorable, remember, the game isn't over. It's changing phases. New players, new techniques, new masks for old intentions. What you've learned so far isn't a trick, it's a principle. Detect, calibrate, impose. Recognize the test to the first millimeter. Calibrate the response without anger, without explanation, without haste. Impose the consequence that educates those around you. That doesn't make you perfect. It prepares you. And prepared isn't someone who has an answer for everything, but someone who has the courage not to react when the answer humiliates them. It's someone who, when in doubt, maintains their own dignity and lets the other person speak for themselves with their own echo. When night falls, and you return home after a day filled with disrespect, you feel something you may have forgotten: lightness. Not the artificial lightness of someone who has fled conflict, but the concrete lightness of someone who has borne their name with conviction. You will notice that you sleep better when you are not tormented by the shame of what you have kept secret. And when you wake up, the world will test you again. But this time, the social balance sheet of those around you will be updated. You are someone who does not sell out for applause, does not bend under pressure, and does not interfere in the theater of others. The game takes note of this, and from now on, you will play the next moves with another piece in your hand, that of silence that weighs on you, of constancy that builds up, of presence that provides explanations. Next, the game board discovers the strangest weapon for those who always considered you predictable: your calculated, precise, transformative absence of noise. This is where the next phase begins, and those who have tested you will discover, in a most unpleasant way, what happens when laughter finds no audience and provocation finds no resonance. Silence has always been misunderstood. Many believe it is simply the absence of words, an uncomfortable emptiness that must be filled as quickly as possible. But true silence, born of conscious choice, is not a hole. It is a weapon, an invisible blade that cuts deeper than shouting, deeper than justifications, and even deeper than insults. Used correctly, it shows not weakness, but calculation. Picture this scene. Someone makes a joke at your expense in front of everyone. Everyone laughs and expects you to laugh along. That's the script, the role they've written for you. But you don't follow through, you don't laugh, you don't explain, you don't react. You just stare quietly until the weight of your lack of response becomes the true center of the room. Silence now speaks louder than all the laughter combined. In that moment, the game changes. The strange thing is that people underestimate the power of this moment. They expect predictability. Anyone who returns a joke with someone else is entering a stage theater. Anyone who justifies themselves is giving away their energy like a trophy. Anyone who shouts turns the scene into a spectacle and confirms exactly what the other person wanted, to unbalance them. But anyone who chooses calculated silence creates a void that no one knows how to deal with. The human brain is addicted to patterns. When this pattern breaks, tension arises, and tension creates fear. Not fear of violence, but fear of uncertainty, because the unpredictable is always dangerous. Think about it. How many times have you lost a battle because you felt you had to react immediately? How many times has your haste to defend yourself transformed your reason into weakness? How many times have you supplied the enemy with ammunition, only to then find yourself unable to bear a few seconds of silence? This is where strategic silence differs from cowardly silence. Cowardly silence arises from insecurity. One remains silent because one doesn't know what to say, because one is afraid of losing control, because one is afraid of being judged. It is a fragile silence that expresses submission. Strategic silence, on the other hand, is the opposite. One remains silent because one has decided it isn't worth reacting immediately, because one recognizes that the other has exposed themselves, because one understands that the burden of absence weighs heavier than any words. This almost invisible difference completely changes the effect. A clear example of this is negotiation games. Many leaders say their greatest weapon is not talking, but waiting. 3 seconds of silence after a proposal leads the other side to start justifying itself. 5 seconds, and they present arguments. 10 seconds, and they offer concessions you never asked for. The discomfort of those who can't stand emptiness ultimately opens doors. Think about it. If it works in multi-million-dollar negotiations, why shouldn't it work in everyday life? Have you ever noticed how anxious people become when confronted with silence? Have you noticed how they try to fill the space with everything, even nonsense, just to avoid feeling this invisible burden? In situations of disrespect, this mechanism becomes a powerful weapon. If someone attacks you and waits for your reaction, silence breaks the script. The aggression loses half its power because it doesn't find a target. Moreover, it shifts the responsibility for what was said back onto the aggressor. While everyone looks at you, waiting for a reaction, you stare back silently until he finds himself naked in front of the group. The scene that began as an attack turns into collective discomfort toward the initiator. You didn't defend yourself, you exposed yourself. But why do so few use this strategy? Because it requires emotional control. Because instinct dictates the reaction. Because the heart races, the mind churns, and everything within you screams for an immediate response. But true strength lies precisely in controlling this impulse. Every second of silence is a taut rope, and those who can endure the tension without giving in dominate the scene. The weak speak. The strong decide when to speak. What if I told you that silence often not only disarms the enemy, but also reveals who's truly on your side? Think about it. Who's trying to laugh at your silence to force you to reveal yourself? Who's getting upset because you don't respond as expected? And who respects your stance and changes their behavior without you saying a word? Silence is a filter. It separates allies from opportunists. There's another layer that few recognize. Silence can be used as a shield, but it can also be used as a sword. As a shield, it prevents you from engaging in pointless discussions, wasting energy where it's not worth it, and getting drawn into other people's dramas. As a sword, it cuts through other people's expectations and leaves a lasting impression. Example: someone publicly rejects your idea. You don't object. You continue your presentation as if the interruption hadn't happened. The effect is devastating. The scoffer is weakened because their words vanish into thin air. You haven't given them a platform. You haven't given them validity. Silence nullified the attack. What if you used silence not just as a reaction, but as preparation? Have you ever considered how those around you react if you don't fill every gap? Next time you have a conversation, try talking less, observe more. Let the discomfort of someone who can't handle the emptiness work for you. People reveal secrets when silence reigns. They reveal weaknesses, confessions, insecurities. It's as if silence is a mirror that forces everyone to face their own face. How many truths have you missed because you couldn't bear to wait? How many masks have fallen in the face of silence, but you didn't see them because you were in a hurry to speak? Machiavelli said it is safer to be feared than loved when both are impossible. Strategic silence arouses precisely this kind of fear. It is not physical fear. It is the psychological fear of not knowing what will happen next. The aggressor is afraid because they cannot predict whether you will strike back, whether you will be exposed, whether you will retaliate later. They are afraid because they have lost control of the game. What seemed like a joke or an offhand remark now weighs like an invisible threat. This kind of power needs no words. It hangs in the air, hovering until everyone feels it. Now imagine a banal situation. You're at a dinner party and someone makes a sarcastic remark about your personal life. Everyone laughs and expects you to laugh too. Instead, you stare at the person for a few seconds, without anger, without smiling, and continue eating. The conversation around you continues, but something has changed. The laughter has lost its power. The person who made the joke senses your lack of recognition. The discomfort remains until the end of the evening. You didn't have to raise your voice or fight back. You simply deprived them of the very thing disrespect needs to survive: your participation. What would happen if you started skipping that food in every situation? If you stopped laughing at yourself to please others? If you stopped justifying every criticism? If you stopped reacting immediately to every provocation? What would happen if people suddenly realized that their words no longer have power over you? There's an even more fascinating detail. Silence not only changes how others see you, but also how you see yourself. When you start practicing strategic silence, you discover that you don't have to immediately defend yourself, that you don't have to beg for approval, that you don't have to constantly explain yourself. You discover that you can endure discomfort and emerge stronger. This builds your confidence. You don't have to shout to feel powerful. You don't have to humiliate anyone to feel superior. You simply have to react differently than before. What if I told you that silence can be addictive? That once you experience it, you realize how often you've wasted energy reacting, that you take pleasure in watching others give up when they don't get the response they expected. It's like discovering a new language that's always been there, but you never learned how to use. Of course, this doesn't mean that silence is always the solution. It's a tool, and like any tool, it must be used carefully. Overuse can become a barrier. Careless use can come across as unjustified contempt. The key is choice. Silence should be used when the other person's noise doesn't deserve your energy, when the attack is too quiet to respond to, or when the lack of response is worth more than any words. So how do you know when to use silence? Ask yourself, does this person deserve an explanation? Does this situation deserve a debate? Does this provocation deserve a platform? If the answer is no, choose silence. You'll discover how much more powerful it is than a full speech. What if I were to assure you that silence ultimately reveals more than words? That others reveal who they truly are in the emptiness of your reaction? Power lies in being unpredictable. Silence is not empty. It is the pause before the highest note. It is the space between words that gives meaning to the sentence. It is the interval that transforms action into memory. Whoever learns to master silence learns to master the scene. And whoever masters the scene doesn't need to beg for respect, for they are already standing in the air. And now I ask you, how many times will you continue to speak when you should remain silent? How many times will you justify yourself when you could simply look and remain silent? How many opportunities will you let pass before you realize that the greatest sound you can make is precisely the absence of it? Consistency is the invisible line that separates those who are respected from those who are merely tolerated. You can impress once. You can set boundaries in a single moment. You can even surprise an entire group with an unexpected response. But if you don't repeat that pattern on every occasion, it will evaporate like smoke. Respect isn't cemented in a single gesture. It builds up in layers day after day until it becomes part of your identity. Those who observe it come to believe that respect is not an act, but an essence. This is where true authority is born. Most fail at this point because they view respect as an event, when in reality it is a process, a continuous, slow, relentless process. A process that requires discipline even in the most mundane situations, especially those that seem unimportant. One of the clearest examples of this is the work of sports coaches. Imagine a coach who wants to punish tardiness. The first week, he benches a player who arrives 10 minutes late. The entire group comments on the behavior. Some are impressed, others concerned. But the following week, another athlete arrives late, and the coach ignores it, either because he likes the player or because he thinks it's not worth creating tension. In that moment, the entire effect of the initial decision fizzles out. The group realizes that the rule is not a rule but a preference, and if it is a preference, it can be negotiated. The consequence is broken. Now, whenever the opportunity arises, the players will test it again, hoping that this time tolerance will work in their favor. What began as a demonstration of authority ended as a display of inconsistency. The same mechanism can be found in our personal and professional relationships. You set a boundary for someone by saying you won't accept a certain behavior, but then make an exception on a day of fatigue or goodwill. The other person understands that the boundary wasn't rigid, but flexible, that it can be circumvented with charm, persistence, or simply distraction. And so every boundary intended to strengthen one's image ultimately serves to undermine it. The strange thing is, by the time you demand decisiveness again, it's too late. Respect has been lost through inconsistency. Have you ever noticed how some people seem untouchable, even without raising their voices? Have you ever wondered why colleagues or family members hold back in their presence, while they themselves make jokes or criticize others without thinking? The secret rarely lies in grand gestures. The secret lies in the consistency with which they deal with every deviation. They don't laugh at provocations, don't ignore small signs, and don't give in to pressure disguised as friendliness. They set a standard so rigid that everyone around them understands. There's no point in insisting on it. The cost always outweighs the gain. There are striking examples from history that illustrate this principle. Winston Churchill, for example, was known for his consistency. He responded to political insults not with occasional outbursts of anger, but always with a sarcastic and calculating tone. This consistency created the almost theatrical impression that he would never be perceived as a victim. Another example comes from Japanese diplomacy, where prolonged silence in the face of unwelcome proposals became the cultural norm. It wasn't just occasional that someone would fall silent to express their displeasure. It happened all the time. So much so that when negotiating in Japan, foreigners knew that charged silence was more valuable than an explicit rejection. This is consistency translated into language. But how can this be implemented in everyday life? Imagine a group of friends in which someone is always late. Everyone complains but accepts it, until one day you decide not to wait. You leave at the agreed time, even if that means leaving the latecomer behind. At first, this is shocking, maybe even irritating. But if you do this consistently and without exception, the group soon realizes, when you set a time, you mean business. Being late is no longer the rule, but the exception. You didn't have to argue, you didn't have to shout, you didn't have to justify yourself. You simply repeated the same attitude over and over until it became predictable. Imagine if you did this just once. The message would be completely different. People would interpret it as an outburst of anger, a fit of rage, or a one-time gesture. They might restrain themselves for a few days at most, but soon they would revert to their old behavior because they realized they lacked consistency. True power lies not in the first action, but in all the subsequent ones. The first creates an impact, subsequent ones build reputation. And you? How many times have you set a boundary and then destroyed it with your own hands? How many times have you forgiven too quickly, backed down too quickly, and once again ignored what you promised you wouldn't tolerate? The curious thing is that consistency not only protects, but also liberates. Because if you always act the same way in a situation, you eliminate inner doubts. You no longer have to think about every situation, no longer have to weigh up whether to react or not. The reaction is already programmed. This saves energy and strengthens your attitude. Inconsistent people live a life of fatigue because they waste energy on every small decision. Consistent people are feared because they become predictable in the way they demand respect, but unpredictable in how much they can persevere without wavering. There's a fascinating fact in social psychology. Experiments show that people prefer rigid rules to inconsistent ones. A demanding but consistent boss causes less stress in the long run than one who's friendly one day and lashes out for no reason the next. The same applies to parents, teachers, friends, and partners. Consistent people may be considered strict, but never unstable, and instability is always more dangerous than strictness. That's why those who consistently enforce boundaries end up surrounded by people who respect them, even if they don't like them. There are improbable stories that support this point. For example, it is said that a warden in a North American prison managed to maintain the discipline of his violent inmates not through physical force, but through absolute predictability. He followed every rule precisely, every day, and without favoritism. He never accepted bribes and never made exceptions. The inmates, accustomed to exploiting the dissent of weaker guards, quickly gave up. They knew there was no loophole. And so, paradoxically, a single unarmed man controlled dozens of purposefully armed criminals because his consistency was more powerful than any weapon. Have you ever considered how many problems could be avoided if you adopted such a stance? Unwavering, leaving no room for unnecessary negotiations. Have you ever imagined how many trials of patience would simply no longer exist because others would know it's not worth trying? The path to success isn't great. It starts with the smallest details. Is someone interrupting you? You stop speaking and only continue when the interruption is over, always. Is someone making fun of you? You don't laugh, never. Is someone trying to pressure you? You respond in the same firm tone. Understood. I'll assess it. Always. With each repetition, your image gains a stone. In a few months, you build an invisible wall, and then the unlikely happens. People begin to control themselves. Not because they've been threatened, but because they already know how you'll react. Fear lies not in doubt, but in certainty. They're fully aware that any attempt to cross their boundaries will be met with the same reaction. And because they know this, they avoid the attempt. Disrespect doesn't disappear from the world, but it does disappear around you. A sober analysis reveals that even the most skilled manipulators prefer inconsistent targets. They look for people who sometimes say yes and sometimes no, people who feel offended one day and give in the next. It's emotional unpredictability that fuels abuse. When the consequences are unpredictable, the perpetrator feels emboldened to keep trying. It's like a slot machine. You never know when the jackpot will hit, so you just keep playing. But when every attempt elicits the same dry, decisive response, the game loses its appeal. You ever wondered why some people keep testing you even though they know they're wrong? Have you noticed that they stop testing others but keep testing you? It's not bad luck. It's calculated. They believe you'll eventually give in. And if you give in even once, it confirms all their previous attempts. Consistency isn't just necessary, it's vital. Curiously, even animals understand this principle. Anyone who has ever trained dogs knows that behavior can only be shaped through consistent repetition. If the owner sometimes allows them to go on the couch and sometimes fights them, the animal will never understand the rule. However, if the rule is always applied the same way, obedience becomes second nature. If even an animal understands this logic, imagine what happens to humans, who constantly look for loopholes, exceptions, and moments of weakness. But you might be wondering, wouldn't it be exhausting to live like this, reacting harshly to even the smallest insult? The truth is, the greatest effort comes at the beginning. At first, it requires constant attention. It costs energy. But as the pattern solidifies, it becomes less demanding. People learn to stop exerting themselves, and their lives become easier, not harder. The burden lies in the inconsistency, not the consistency. What if I told you that consistency is the most subtle form of intimidation? You don't have to threaten, you don't have to shout, you don't have to physically force yourself. You simply have to behave the same way every time. The people around you feel this rule like an invisible wall, and this wall is respected more than any speech. Have you ever noticed how much more confident you feel around people who have clear standards? Have you noticed that you respect their rules, even if you don't like them, because you know what to expect? At its core, consistency is an identity choice. You decide what kind of person you want to be, someone who occasionally gives in, or someone who always stands firm. There is no middle ground. Every exception undermines your reputation. Every deviation turns your walls to rubble. Consistency is tough, but it's also the only way to build lasting respect. Those who practice it know that in the long run, they never lose. And when you finally embrace this pattern, you discover something surprising. You find that the loneliness around you diminishes. People who once mocked you disappear. People who once took advantage of your goodwill move away. But new people approach you. People who respect boundaries, who seek stability, who recognize value. Your network changes. Your circle changes. Your life changes. And you, are you willing to maintain your own wall? Are you willing to forego the comfort of exceptions in order to reap the solid burden of respect? How many times will you allow your limits to be tested before you choose consistency as your weapon? Ultimately, the lesson is clear. Respect is not demanded, but imposed. Not just once, but constantly. Not in big moments, but in small ones. Those who understand this are no longer a target, but a reference. And when you become a reference, you no longer have to shout or beg. Your presence is already the warning. Your constancy is already the threat. Your constancy is already the wall that no one dares to cross. Sometimes an appropriate reaction is not enough. The world does not store small, balanced reactions, but shocks. If someone crosses the line into disrespect and you pay them back in kind, the scene is lost as a mere exchange of blows. But when your own reaction seems stronger than the insult, when the counterattack is more serious than expected, then the memory is created. It is this calculated surplus that imprints in the other person's memory the certainty that it is not worth repeating. It is like an animal that suffers a violent shock while trying to move forward. It does not try again, not because it cannot, but because it now associates the act with an unbearable price. Many people are under the illusion that it is enough to calmly correct someone and show maturity. But maturity without impact is invisible. Think of the colleague who interrupts you. If you just keep talking each time, they will repeat the gesture because they do not feel the consequences. Now imagine that you stop participating the third time, gather your notes, and remain silent until the end. No drama, no speech, just absence. The meeting ends and everyone realizes that it has lost momentum without you. If someone speaks up the next day, that same colleague will be embarrassed to be cited as an indirect reason for their silence. What was merely an annoyance becomes a memory. What was mere disrespect becomes a prize. And what happens when the cost is higher than the insult? The social brain reacts cautiously, registers that you are someone who not only exacts retaliation, but also raises the price for those who dare to test it. This is where true respect comes from, not from cold balance, but from calculated disproportion. Great strategists have always known this. It's not about revenge, but about pedagogy, teaching through discomfort. Have you ever wondered how many people continue to make fun of you because they never experienced the true impact of a consequence? Have you ever noticed how some people treat your boundaries like decoration because they were never truly punished for crossing them? There are true stories that demonstrate how this logic works. A sales manager who was constantly mocked by a subordinate in meetings tried for months to respond ironically or calmly. Nothing changed. Until one day, interrupted again, he closed his notebook, apologized, and left the room. 15 minutes later, the meeting ended without any important decisions being made. The director reprimanded not the manager, but the subordinate who had caused his departure. The subordinate never repeated this. The reaction was not shouting, not insulting, but disproportionate absence. The gravity lay not in the voice, but in the emptiness. The same thing happens in personal relationships. A friend who constantly embarrasses you in public expects you to playfully protest, defend yourself with jokes, and heat up the scene. But the day you don't laugh, don't react, and leave the table without explanation, the tables turn. The group notices the discomfort, and your friend feels the cold shoulder. The next meeting is already a time for caution. You didn't have to fight. You simply demonstrated that a joke results in you losing your presence. And presence is valuable. But what if that seems too extreme? Disillusion keeps you in the same position. You believe it's excessive to respond with more force than you received. But disrespect has never been fair. It's cowardly, opportunistic, and always tries to achieve more than meets the eye. A proportionate response maintains apparent balance, but doesn't correct the structure. What it corrects is the excess, which becomes etched in memory. How often have you wished you'd done more? How often have you thought, I should have left forever. I should have left it at that. I should have shown that I'm not a toy. There are also silent reactions that act like insidious poison. Someone repeatedly makes fun of you, and instead of addressing it immediately, you gradually withdraw their access. You stop sharing personal information, stop inviting people to meetings, stop answering calls after hours. Gradually, the person realizes they've lost space, privileges, and intimacy. What seemed like a joke has led to permanent ostracism. This mismatch is cruel for those who abuse their closeness, because they realize too late that every gesture came at a price. When we apply these consequences, something unexpected happens. Others begin to perceive us differently. The reputation of being docile or passive dissolves. In its place emerges the aura of someone who doesn't need to shout, but who transforms every insult into a heavy guilt. This reputation exists even before you are there. Before they speak to you, they already know they have to weigh their words. Before they make jokes, they already know it could cost them dearly. Have you ever imagined what your life would be like if everyone around you thought twice before testing your boundaries? Have you ever considered how your environment, your interactions, and even your career would change if respect were inevitable rather than optional? There's a little-known story about a teacher who was constantly provoked by students who wanted to make fun of him. In the first year, he tried verbal reprimands, attempts at dialogue, and even conventional punishments. Nothing changed. In the second year, he used a different method. Every time someone mocked him, he would interrupt the class, call for quiet, and cancel the day's lesson. The students realized that by mocking them, they were missing out on the material, wasting time, and even missing the chance to prepare for exams. Within a few weeks, the jokes disappeared, not because the students became more respectful, but because the consequences outweighed the humor. Disproportionality educated. That's the crux of the matter. You don't have to be cruel, but you do have to be remembered. Minor consequences are forgotten. Major consequences linger in memory for years. And memory maintains respect. What would happen if you applied this logic to every area of your life? What would happen if instead of laughing at jokes, you withdrew your presence? If, instead of accepting constant delays without waiting, you moved on? If, instead of justifying yourself in the face of unfair criticism, you ended the conversation? What would happen if every instance of disrespect came with a higher price than expected? The result is simple. There's less testing. Disrespect shifts to other victims. People learn that they're not a training ground, a punching bag, or an easy target. They learn that the risk outweighs the benefit. And that's the essence of true respect. What few realize is that these disproportionate reactions also reveal who truly matters. Those who rebel against your stance demonstrate that they only approached you to insult you. Those who accept and adapt demonstrate that they were willing to respect you, but simply needed to understand your limits. The filter is natural. By becoming tougher, you don't lose people, but rather free riders. Now think about your own life. How many are still alive because you never forced them to pay for their actions? How many are still alive simply because they never experienced the true consequences of their actions? This is the turning point. Here, you stop merely reacting and become the one who leaves a mark. Because respect is ultimately memory, and memory only takes root when there's a shock, when there's an impact, when there's a mismatch. If you continue to give back only in equal measure, you'll remain invisible. But when you learn to add more weight, each of your gestures becomes a recorded lesson. And don't kid yourself, this won't earn you hatred, but respect. Because deep down, even those who feel the severity of their reaction know they deserve it. The human mind justifies discomfort with the logic, I shouldn't repeat it. And by not repeating it, you already recognize its power. How many chapters of your life could have been different if you had reacted this way from the beginning? How many doors would never have closed? How many relationships would never have broken up? How many colleagues would you never have insulted if each of you had felt the cost of your own actions? Now you have a choice. You can continue down the path of proportionality and reap small, forgotten victories, or you can accept calculated disproportions and thus build lasting respect. The world doesn't respect those who merely survive. The world respects those who enforce remembrance. And remembrance isn't born of balance, it's born of impact. And you, are you ready to be remembered? Are you ready to turn every attempt at disrespect into a story no one dares to repeat? Because when you reach that point, you will have taken the decisive step, and the next, the final, will be even more profound. You will create an image so powerful that no one dares even test it. This is the territory we will enter next, where respect is no longer just a reaction, but becomes aura, where presence speaks before voice, where reputation goes before you. This is where the journey ends, at the point where the invisible battle for respect becomes a lasting victory. You've come this far, and perhaps you don't even realize the transformation that has already begun within you. Every word, every idea, every scene in this script wasn't just a reflection of the world, but a mirror. And in this mirror, you began to see something that had perhaps been hidden for a long time. The awareness that respect isn't given, but constructed, imposed, and protected. The path we've taken so far hasn't been easy, because there's no such thing as ease when it comes to this topic. We've talked about strategic silence, relentless consistency, disproportionate consequences, image, and intelligence in dealing with human behavior. We've talked about how every detail shapes the way others see you. And now, in this final word, it's no longer just about understanding, but about deciding who you will be from now on. The first truth to remember is simple. Respect is not a prize. There is no secret worldly jury that evaluates your kindness, your generosity, your patience, and decides one day to place an invisible crown on your head. If you still expect recognition for the good you do, you will be disappointed. The world doesn't function with moral trophies. The world responds to your posture. It measures how you react to the slightest sign of scrutiny. It watches how you position yourself when someone tries to take your place. It records how you react when a provocation comes disguised as a joke. It is in these moments that the game is decided, not in grand speeches, but in small gestures, repeated over and over until they become a trademark. And when you look back, how many times have you realized that you were the one who taught others disrespect? Not out of malice, not out of conscious weakness, but out of the mistaken belief that swallowing is nobler than reacting. How many times have you laughed even though you didn't want to laugh? How many times have you said no problem, even though anger burned inside? How many times have you turned the other cheek, expecting recognition, and received only contempt? All of these were lessons, but not lessons for you. They were lessons for others who learned that you can be needed. Change begins when you choose to reverse the learning process. When you decide that your every gesture from today onwards will be a message. Practical change begins with something that seems small but is massive, setting standards. You don't have to change everything at once. Choose one behavior you've always tolerated and resolve never to accept it again. It might be interruptions while you speak. It might be someone's chronic lateness. It might be the constant jokes about you. Choose one of these and be uncompromising. Don't negotiate. Don't make exceptions. Don't justify anything. Just respond the same way every time with quiet determination. At first, it will be strange and uncomfortable. You'll get stares, you'll hear comments, you'll be tested. But persevere. The world has to learn the new language. And that language is learned only through repetition. Then you expand your territory. Every boundary that once seemed flexible becomes a wall. Every time someone crosses it, they meet the same reaction. Oppressive silence, absence, distance, ice. There is no drama, no spectacle. There are only consequences. Over time, those consequences cease to be a surprise and become your reputation. And when your reputation is clear, you don't have to act as much. Others act for you. You hold back. You control yourself. You learn to weigh their words. You learn that their presence cannot be used as a stage set. But transformation isn't just about how others treat you. It's also about how you begin to see yourself. If you stand firm, you'll discover a self-respect you didn't know existed. You'll discover you can sleep soundly because you didn't swallow any frogs that day. You'll discover you can look in the mirror without feeling the bitter taste of cowardice. You'll discover that the right silence is more empowering than 1,000 explanations. At this point, something profound happens. You realize you no longer need to seek approval. You no longer need to strive for recognition, because those who respect themselves already carry the most important validation within themselves. And that doesn't mean becoming cold or bitter. It means becoming a whole person. When you don't tolerate disrespect, you open the door to better relationships. Good people come closer. People who once respected you but stayed away because they saw you surrounded by noise now find a way to be by your side. Your environment changes. Your energy shifts. Life takes on a new structure, because when you set boundaries, you automatically filter who stays and who goes. And that filter is the key to a more carefree life. You may be wondering if you'll lose people in the process. You will. But think about it. What you're losing aren't actually people, but weights. They were anchors holding you down. They were opportunists draining your energy. They were parasites feeding off your silence. These aren't losses, they're liberations. And every liberation makes room for something better. The most important point is to understand that practice doesn't begin with the major offense. It begins with the details, the contemptuous glance, the subtle interruption, the seemingly innocent remark. In these moments, you must apply everything, because those who fail in the small things also fail in the big ones. Those who practice in the details win the big battles. So don't wait for a big test. Start today with the smallest gesture. And if you think all this is too difficult, remember, it is hard enough to live without respect. It is painful enough to accept provocations. It is hard enough to bear the burden of sleepless nights remembering what you didn't say or do. So why not exchange this useless pain for the productive pain of discipline? Why not exchange the burden of cowardly silence for the burden of strategic silence? The difficulty will remain either way. It is up to you which difficulty you prefer to endure, the destructive or the constructive. You've probably felt something different by now. Perhaps a memory has returned. Perhaps an incident has resurfaced. Perhaps an old resentment has resurfaced. This is a sign that you already know where to begin. This is your starting point. Don't wait for ideal conditions. Don't wait until you're ready, because the perfect moment will never come. Respect begins the moment you decide to no longer accept anything less than you deserve. And if you still have doubts, make yourself a simple promise. Never again will you laugh at a joke that hurts. It may seem insignificant, but it's everything. This will be the first building block of your wall. The next ones will come naturally, because every time you respect yourself, you feel your strength grow, and that strength never fades. Remember something crucial. The world is watching you, but it's also testing you. Every person you meet will ask silent questions. How far can I go? What can I endure? What will they tolerate? Their answers lie not in your words, but in your reactions. Show that your dignity is not for sale. Show that your time is not expendable. Show that your presence is valuable. Over time, these answers will shape your image, and your image will be your shield. And when this transformation is consolidated, something magical happens. You no longer have to react to every detail, because respect has become part of your aura. Your mere presence is enough to maintain balance. Your reputation will precede you before you enter a room. And when that happens, you find peace, because you no longer have to fight at every corner. The world has already gotten the message. This is the journey we have begun together. From whispering disrespect to building an unassailable image. From cowardly silence to strategic silence. From inconsistency to a solid wall. From appropriate response to disproportionate impact. And finally, from practice to the state. Now the decision is in your hands. If you felt the power of this content and awakened something within you, then be part of the next step. Like this video to show that it made a difference. Leave a comment, even anonymously, because your voice counts and can inspire others who are also silent. And above all, subscribe to the channel, because this is just one step on a much longer path that we still have to walk together. Respect begins within yourself but grows as it spreads. Every like, every comment, every subscription is further proof that we are not alone in this invisible battle. So act now. Like, comment, subscribe. Your transformation has already begun, and the whole world needs to feel the difference.